Chapter 3091. Qingshan closed his eyes slightly and said softly, Jingyu, you don't know a person like me who has a lot of stories. Go find a silly girl. He had too many things hidden in his heart. They were really not suitable for each other. It had nothing to do with Lanyu. Pei Jingyu chuckled softly, and her smile was a little bitter. That day's shooting was very difficult. The director felt that the male and female leads were completely unable to get into the scene. There was no progress after a day of shooting. According to usual practice, they had to reshoot at night. However, with Qingshan's background, the director didn't dare to do that. Therefore, at 6 o'clock in the evening, Lanyu still picked up Qingshan. Qingshan got in the car. Cece was in the car, and she looked very excited. Qingshan smiled and sat next to her. Where did you go during the day? The little fool was very happy. Lanyu brought me to the amusement park, and we fed the pigeons in the square. Lanyu smiled. She also asked me to catch a few and roast them. Qingshan reached out and touched Cece's little face. Let's order some pigeons tonight. Lin Cece said a little embarrassedly. Last time I was with Guze, we only caught 2. Qingshan looked at Lanyu in the front row and thought to herself, I don't know what Guze is thinking. For the company, he can find a well-educated and polite woman to be Mrs. Gu and decorate the Gu family's appearance. He can hide Cece as a concubine. I don't know what kind of perverted hobby this is, but Cece likes it. There's no other way. Qingshan lowered her eyes. She suddenly remembered, why did Cece become like this? Lanyu said that Cece was injured in New York. Cece can't have children, and Cece lost a part of her little finger. Qingshan felt a little heartache just thinking about it. She turned her head and saw Lin Cece playing with a few small toys in her hands. They were caught by Lanyu. She was as naive as a child. She really needed someone to take good care of her. Qingshan sighed in his heart. That night, they took Lin Cece to the night market and had barbecued skewers. Although Cece had diarrhea later, she was still happy. They also went to see a movie, a cartoon. Lanyu and Qingshan sat on either side, while Cece sat in the middle, holding a large portion of popcorn in her hand. Lanyu also helped her get a large drink. In the world of a girl like Cece, there was no such thing as restraint. She looked at Qingshan and asked in confusion, Sister Qingshan, why aren't you eating? Qingshan smiled. I'm a model. I need to maintain my figure. Cece muttered softly, it's so hard. The sound of her eating was like a little mouse. Qingshan smiled slightly. Lanyu looked at her gentle expression and had an idea. He quietly put his hand on Qingshan's shoulder from behind. She moved a little and looked at him sideways. She didn't stop him or take her hand away. Lanyu smiled slightly and continued to watch the boring cartoon. The whole movie theater was filled with parents and children. For a family of 3 like them, it was really a little special. Of course, later on, they also attracted the attention of everyone around them. Cece's age didn't seem like their child. Everyone thought that Qingshan was the wife and Cece was the mistress. As for Lanyu, this good-looking scumbag, who enjoyed the bliss of having 2 wives, he actually treated his wife better. Chapter 3092. After all, Qingshan was one of the top 5 models in the world. After his identity was exposed, Lanyu's identity was also exposed, followed by Lin Cece's. The whole world was guessing Lin Cece's identity. When they returned to the hotel, there were already many reporters lying in ambush, aiming at the family of 3. The focus was on the relationship between Lanyu and his wife and Lin Cece. Because Madame was too special, they didn't seem like friends. Friends didn't get along like this. It was as if they had a child. The internet was very active these days. Soon, Cece's identity was dug out. She was the daughter of the previous Lin XX. Lin XX had already fallen from grace, so Lin Cece's identity was especially sensitive. Not to mention that the person who had pulled her down was Lanyu. In an instant, Lin Cece was labeled as the person who had acknowledged the thief as her father, and it couldn't be removed. Moreover, they had booked a presidential suite for 3 people. The unscrupulous media had written very harshly. Lanyu and Qingshan hadn't expected things to develop to this extent and hurt Cece. Lanyu had tried to get Kevin to suppress it and get King Entertainment to block it. But while the mainstream media could suppress it, The tabloids were everywhere, giving Lan Yu a headache. It was destined to be a sleepless night. However, Cece didn't know. She was still ignorant. She was still happily hugging her snacks and watching TV like a little mouse. When Qin Shun came out of the bathroom, Lan Yu was smoking in the study. She walked in quietly, put her hand on his shoulder, and used the other to remove the cigarette, but from his fingers. Smoke less. Lan Yu tilted his head to look at her. He silently pulled her to his side and hugged her waist. I'm quite regretful now. Cece could have lived a peaceful life, but we disrupted it, he said in a low voice. Qin Shun reached out and stroked his black hair, smiling faintly. What did you do wrong? You treated her like a child. You did your best for her. Guze is the one in the wrong. She wasn't trying to shirk responsibility, but she was disappointed in Guze. Guze might not be in the country, but Guze's company was so big, and he had a lot of confidence. There should be more than 1 or 2 people who knew about his secret marriage. With such a big news, someone must have told Guze. Now, as long as Guze stood up and said that Cece was his wife, the dirty water on Cece would no longer exist. However, several hours had passed, and Guze hadn't called him at all. Qin Shun wondered if Guze really loved Cece. When he married Cece, was it like raising a little pet that he could play with every week when he was free? Had Cece met Guze's parents before their secret marriage? If not, that would be terrible. Qin Shun said slowly, if Guze doesn't say anything, what are you going to do? Lan Yu took out the same cigarette from the pack and lit it. This time, Qin Shun didn't stop him. He looked up at her. Then take care of her. She can't go back to that villa. They could protect her now, but once she went back to the villa and was found, Cece would be hurt. Lan Yu said as he held Qin Shun's hand and whispered, Qin Shun, do you trust me? I just want to take care of her. If you don't want to live with her, I can send her back to the nursing home for now. Guze should pick her up later. Qin Shun hugged Lan Yu. Don't send her back. She'll feel abandoned. Chapter 3093. Qin Shun didn't know why she was so good to Cece. She was a grown woman and had an ambiguous relationship with Lan Yu, but she just wanted to take care of her. Lan Yu hugged her and said softly, okay. As for Guze, he was a little disappointed, just like how Guze gave up on Gume many years ago. Was Guze going to give up on Cece again? After not hearing any news for 1 night, 1 day, and 2 days, Lan Yu was almost sure that Guze was going to give up. Meanwhile, in B City, Guze had already gone back. He had gone back urgently because of Cece's matter. There weren't many people in the company who knew about Guze's secret marriage, but over the past few months, many people had spread the news. After Lin Cece's identity was exposed, the company's shareholders strongly opposed Guze revealing Lin Cece's identity because Lin Cece's special background would cause the company's stock price to plummet. It was even possible that the company would be liquidated. Guze held 2 consecutive days of meetings. In the end, he chose the company. He knew that Cece would be fine under Lan Yu's protection. Later, Grand Hyatt's official news came out that Cece was adopted by Lan Yu's father. Moreover, Cece's long-term experience in the nursing home was also exposed. Guze closed his eyes. He knew what this meant to Cece and what it meant to him. For the sake of his shareholders, for the sake of his own interests, he would never admit that Cece was his wife for the rest of his life. Guze spoke to Lan Yu on the phone. Lan Yu scolded him, but that was all. As for Cece and Guze's marriage, Lan Yu couldn't directly intervene because Cece would think about Guze. She really didn't know anything. She would even ask when Guze would come back, and she had to go back to the villa to wait. When she said it in an innocent tone, Qin Shun's eyes were a little hot, and he wanted to cry. Cece was really silly. She was so stupid that it made one's heart ache. So stupid that they couldn't bear to tell her about Guze's cruelty. Qin Shun's commercial was finished 3 days later. Cece was brought back to B City and stayed with Qin Shun and Lan Yu. Xiao Rongyu liked Cece very much because Cece was very pretty. Cece also liked Rongyu because Rongyu was very pretty. In a sense, their IQ was almost the same. Lan Yu looked at the two of them leaning against each other, watching cartoons and eating snacks together. He couldn't help but sigh. Actually, they're my dad's adopted granddaughters. I can bring them to the amusement park in the future. Qinshin was amused by him and looked at the two little ones. Actually, Cece is pretty good like this. At least she's happy. She thought that if Guze didn't want Cece, she and Lanyu would raise Cece for the rest of her life. But they didn't expect that Cece would secretly run away one day. She went to look for Guze. Although she didn't understand things, she missed Guze and was afraid that Guze wouldn't be able to find her. Cece ran away a week later. She carried away her small backpack, which contained her private stash of change. Qinshin asked the servants to make afternoon tea. When he called Cece to eat, there was no one in her bedroom. Moreover, the bedroom was empty. She had taken away the few dolls that Lanyu had caught for her. Qinshin was stunned for a moment and immediately realized that Cece had run away from home. She hurriedly called Lanyu. Cece is missing. I can't find her anywhere. I'll call her. Lanyu was also shocked. Then, she comforted Qinshin. She's not ignorant. I think she went to look for Guze. Chapter 3094. At the headquarters of Hungtong Corporation, Guze was in the middle of a shareholders meeting. There were about 50 or 60 people there. At the door, Guze's secretary suddenly pushed the door open. She had a complicated expression on her face and called out, "President Gu." Guze looked up and was about to say something when he froze. His secretary was not the only one standing at the door. Cece and more than a dozen reporters were also there. Cece looked happy. "Guze, you're back?" Guze looked at her, his gaze deep and quiet. It was so quiet that she was a little scared. Cece walked towards him and said, "Guze, what's wrong? Are you unhappy?" The secretary came back to her senses and said sternly, "President Gu, today's shareholders meeting was to recommend that President Gu divorce because President Gu couldn't have such a stain on his reputation. But now Lin Cece was here. President Gu, if you don't make a prompt decision, the company's stock price." The secretary lowered his voice and reminded him, "The reporters are here. If President Gu says anything wrong, the consequences will be very serious." Guze clenched his fists. He looked at Cece's panicked face. Her eyes were full of uneasiness, as if she didn't understand why he didn't move closer to her and why he looked at her so coldly. Under such a gaze, the reporters were like wolves that couldn't be stopped. They quickly rushed in. Lin Cece was knocked into the meeting room. She didn't know she was pushed, but she fell in front of Guze. She was only half a meter away from him, but it seemed like they were worlds apart. The reporters were like sharks that had smelled blood. They crowded around and aimed their microphones at Guze. "President Gu, there's news that Miss Lin is your wife, but it's a secret marriage, isn't it?" Lin Cece lay on the ground and looked up at Guze. Her eyes, dark and simple, gazed at him like a young pigeon. Her eyes were eager. She had never been so eager for him to say she was his wife. She didn't understand anything else. She only knew that if he said no, it must be because she wasn't good enough, so he didn't dare to say it. Lin Cece stubbornly looked at Guze. She didn't get up and just looked at him. Guze lowered his gaze and stared at the innocent and weak little thing. The desire in her eyes he did not see, but he could not. Under the gazes of so many reporters and so many people, Guze said very softly, "No, no." Lin Cece's eyes were filled with regret and hurt. She looked at him in disbelief. She couldn't believe that he would do this to her. The reporter became even more excited and began to interview Guze. "Mr. Gu, what's your relationship with Miss Lin?" Guze said softly, "We're just friends. She's Lan Yu's sister, and I treat her as my sister too." "Sister?" Lin Cece was in a daze. He said she was his sister. Was he saying this because of what Lan Yu said about the stock price? So he was sacrificing her and making her unable to see the light of day for the rest of her life. Or did he not want her anymore and find another outstanding person to be with? The reporter asked on her behalf, "Mr. Gu, do you have any plans to get married? After all, a stable family relationship and a healthy heir will give the shareholders and investors a boost in confidence." Guze's eyes moved away from Lin Cece's little face and landed on the reporter's face. He smiled faintly and said, "I will. In fact, I already have someone in a relationship." Chapter 30 to 95. He said that he already had a suitable partner. Did that mean that he was going to marry someone else and have children with them? In other words, he didn't want her anymore? The silly girl lay on the ground, looking as lowly as a plant. She looked up with disillusionment in her eyes. That was the first time she had seen Guze's light. But now it was gone. In the silly girl's heart, she was willing to give up everything, even her life, for Guze. But for the stock price that Lanyu had mentioned, he had given up on her because she wasn't beautiful enough, not outstanding enough, or because she was silly. She got up from the ground and slowly straightened her body. Her small body was being pushed and knocked around, drowning in the crowd. She was hurt. There was a storm in Guze's eyes. He clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. A reporter asked Cece, "Miss Lin, is there something wrong with your intelligence?" Lin Cece smiled sweetly and replied, "Yeah, how did you know? Am I the silly girl that you guys always talk about?" Guze also said that I'm silly, and I'm quite silly. She was still smiling sweetly at him, just like the night he went to the villa in Sea City. But he saw tears in her eyes that others couldn't see, and his heart tightened. Lin Cece took a step back. "Actually, I'm here to clarify things." Guze clenched his fists, loosened them, and then suddenly tightened them again. Blood could be seen as he clenched his fists. He heard his silly girl say seriously, "Actually, I'm here to say goodbye. I'm going back." Going back? Back to Sea City? Guze looked at his secretary and said, "Arrange a driver for Miss Lin." The secretary was his confidant, so he naturally understood his intentions. He smiled and said to the reporter, "Okay, we figured it out. Miss Lin has nothing to do with President Gu. President Gu will be getting engaged to Miss Wenwan in a few days. I believe that everyone will receive President Gu's invitation then." That was quite a big deal. The reporters did not need to ask around to know that when Xian was the daughter of the second largest shareholder of Hungtong. She was a top student who had returned from studying abroad. She was also an artist and seemed to dabble in painting. She was also very beautiful and could be said to be a match made in heaven with Mr. Gu. Lin Cece's little face was a little pale. She retreated, but was silently taken away by the security guards. In the conference room, the reporters were slowly cleared away. Guze got up. Shareholder when stopped him. "Mr. Gu." Guze's body stood perfectly straight. At that moment, many thoughts flashed through his mind. Many years ago, when Gu Mei was in trouble, Yi Miyun had asked him to choose between Gu Mei or his future. He had given up on Gu Mei. This time, he had to choose between Cece and the company. He made the same choice, even if his heart ached and he couldn't bear it. He lowered his eyes. 3 days later, the engagement party will be held at GM Hotel. With that, he left and took the elevator to the top floor. His little fool, his former little fool, was waiting for him there. It was not voluntary, but he forced her to stay because he had some cruel words to say to her. Guze pursed his thin lips and walked over slowly. He placed his palm flat on the door and pushed it open after a long time. When the door opened, the person inside was shocked. She looked at him like a frightened rabbit. Her eyes were a little red and swollen. She must have been crying. Guze wanted to speak, but found that his throat was very tight. Chapter 3096. Guze stood there for a long time before he slowly closed the door. The moment he closed the door, his little fool's body tensed up, as though she was frightened. However, she still looked at him stubbornly wanting an answer. Guze walked towards her, and the little fool took a step back. Her breathing was painful, but she still asked stubbornly, "You don't want me anymore, do you?" She wanted to ask him if what he said to those people was a lie, that he would not marry and have children with others, and that he was lying to her. Guze reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. He said in a low voice, "Cece, I will still take care of you in the future. You can still live there. You won't go, will you?" The little fool gave him a weak smile. There were tears in her eyes, but they didn't fall. Guze couldn't help but call out softly, "Cece." The little fool looked at him and asked again, "You won't go, will you?" He stared at her. It wasn't that he didn't see the desire in her eyes, and it wasn't that he didn't feel her sadness, but he knew that he was soft-hearted. He had Cece, But Hungtong Corporation was doomed. Not only were there external troubles, but there were also internal troubles. The first one was the Wen family. From the beginning to the end, it could have been a trap, and Guze, had fallen into it. From the moment Cece's identity was exposed, he had no choice. Guze's heart was in turmoil, but his face was calm and indifferent. Yes, I won't go. The little fool's face was pale, and she looked at him quietly. You want to divorce me, right? When she asked, Guze felt his heart wrench. He didn't answer her directly, but walked over and hugged her. The little fool was hugged tightly in his arms. He had let down so many people in this life, but the only one he cared about was Gu Mei, and in the future, there would be a little fool. Guze knew that he had feelings for the little fool. He did like her, but it was not to the point where he was willing to give up everything for her. He hugged her tightly and pressed his thin lips against her ear. Cece, I'm sorry. Little fool, I'm sorry. His little fool buried her head in his arms, and soon his heart was wet. Guze closed his eyes and lowered his head. Cece, don't cry. He wanted to kiss her, to soothe her. However, Lin Cece suddenly pushed his body away and took a few steps back. Her face was covered in tears. Her eyes were like those of a wounded animal. After a long time, she whispered, You shouldn't kiss me anymore. She was silly and insensible, but she knew that people who were not together should not be kissed again. Instinctively, she resisted and left his embrace. She was even more open-minded than him. Guze's hands were empty, and his arms felt empty. Lin Cece lifted her face and smiled sweetly at him. Guze, we signed it when we got married. Do we have to sign it for a divorce too? Guze's eyes were a little wet. The way she smiled was like a thorn in his heart. It was very, very uncomfortable. However, at this moment, Guze didn't know that this thorn would make his whole body bleed. This thorn was like the thorns on a rose, beautiful and poisonous. While he was still in a daze, she gave him a very light smile. After signing, I'll leave. Chapter 3097. These 3 words were like a curse that froze Guze. He opened his mouth, and his voice was low and slow. Cece, he wanted to say that they shouldn't end up like this, that she should wait for him for 2 years, but he couldn't say it. Could he tell her to wait for him for 2 years, that he would get engaged to another woman, dump Wenwan, and marry her? Guze couldn't be bothered to say such despicable words. Even if his little fool heard it, she might continue to wait for him in a silly manner. He couldn't bring himself to say it. He wanted to wait until he had settled everything. After he was done with the Wen family, he would go and look for his little fool. However, he never thought of giving up. He wouldn't wait forever in the same place. His little fool might not grow up, but his little fool would become another person and return to her original appearance. Guze couldn't be bothered to say these things. In the end, he just grunted and pressed the intercom. Lawyer Sue, come over for a moment. Lawyer Sue was the company's lawyer and also Guze's personal lawyer. Their marriage was handled by Lawyer Sue. Naturally, it was the same for the divorce. After Lawyer Sue came over, he was sensitive to the atmosphere and knew that this poor girl was probably going to be abandoned by President Gu. He didn't think much of it at first. After all, the difference was too big. But President Gu was very determined when he married her, but it had only been a few months. Lawyer Sue nodded and began to download the divorce agreement to discuss it with President Gu. President Gu proposed a lot of favorable conditions. Lawyer Sue was still a little relieved. After leaving President Gu, the girl was still well taken care of. He looked up at Mrs. Gu and found that she was leaning against the floor-to-ceiling window and looking at the sky outside. She didn't care about material things at all. She just looked at the sky as if she was living in another world. Lawyer Sue suddenly realized that it was President Gu who had barged into her world, not the other way around. Lawyer Sue felt some sympathy in his heart, but as a subordinate, he didn't have the right to say anything. He did a rough calculation in his heart. President Gu's compensation to the girl was about 1 billion. He was quite considerate. At this moment, he hoped that the girl wouldn't have so many thoughts about President Gu. Otherwise, what was the use of having more money? After drafting it, Guze did not communicate with Cece because she had no concept of these things and would not understand. All he needed was her signature. He would hand over all these to a professional accountant, who was a reliable employee of the company. He would also give some of the real estate to her parents. When they arrived at the villa in Sea City, he left it to her. He hoped that she would live there. In his heart, he selfishly hoped that his little girl would foolishly wait there for 2 years. Then he would have an heir. He was not Cece's child, but he would be raised to be his successor. The father and daughter of the one family would no longer need to appear in this world at that time. This was Guze's ruthlessness. His little fool didn't need to know about it. Guze looked up at Cece and was about to speak when the little fool asked softly, "Guze, isn't the outside world beautiful?" He didn't make a sound. She turned her head and looked at him quietly. "Actually, it was good to leave you because I didn't really like waiting for you there. Most of the time, I had to wait until nighttime, but you didn't come. You would forget to call me because you were busy and I didn't dare to call you." Chapter 3098. Her words were clear and logical. How did she look like a fool? Guze's heart was pounded hard. She was just stating the facts and not accusing him. But he felt that what she meant was that he didn't like her very much. She was just a dispensable concoction. His voice was low and hoarse. "You don't want to stay back anymore." "Yeah." She appeared very calm. "I have Lan Yu to take care of me. Or rather, my mother. I want to see her too." Guze's heart was pounded hard again. He walked over and lowered his head to look at her. Then he also looked out of the window like her. There were many pigeons outside. He didn't know where they came from. No wonder she could stay here for half a day. Guze also looked at the pigeons. After a while, he said, "Cece, I'll be here. Can you go to the People's Square?" The little fool took a step back and lowered his eyes. "Okay." He didn't say anything, and she walked to Lawyer Sue. Lawyer Sue really felt sorry for the girl in front of him. She was very innocent. She didn't look at the contents of the agreement and only asked him where to sign it. He pointed to a place, and she signed it. Because President Gu had already signed it, Lawyer Sue kept the document and felt that it wasn't convenient for him to stay. But he was also full of pity for the girl in front of him, so he reached out and touched her hair. "You have to learn to take care of yourself in the future." Because President Gu couldn't take care of her anymore. A marriage, a few months, President Gu's price was more than $1 billion. But Lawyer Sue still felt that the biggest loss was the girl in front of him. Because money had no attributes in her eyes. It didn't matter how much it was. She lost her heart and the feelings she had given to him. Lawyer Sue sighed and went out. Lin Cece looked up at Guze and said softly, "I'm a little hungry." Guze's gaze was deep. He looked in her eyes deeply. "Okay, I'll take you to eat." He didn't take her to a high-end restaurant or a kebab shop. Instead, they went to the small apartment he had bought. He told her that it was a borrowed apartment. Guze opened the door and let her in. Someone had already prepared the ingredients. He was very busy and hadn't cooked for a long time. In the past few months of their marriage, he hadn't spent more than half a month in the villa, including the days when they were newly married, let alone cooking for her. Perhaps it was the last time. Guze poured a glass of milk for Cece and sat her down on the sofa. At this moment, she looked very calm, as if the divorce did not exist. Guze placed the milk in her palm. When he touched her skin, he felt a slight coolness. He did not immediately lift his body. Instead, he whispered, "Cece, do you hate me?" "No." The little fool lowered his eyes and laughed softly. "You should find someone better." She looked up. "You're going to get engaged to her soon, aren't you? Is that why you're in such a hurry to divorce me?" Guze couldn't answer this question. The little fool asked in a small voice, "Do you like her very much?" Guze smiled faintly and still didn't answer. Lin Cece lowered her eyes. "Guze, I hope you can find a girl who is more important than the stock price to marry. If that's the case, you'll be very happy." Chapter 3099. He was so pale and ashamed in front of her. In the end, Guze didn't answer her question. He just rubbed her long hair and walked into the kitchen. There was a roast pigeon dish today, but Cece didn't touch it. She ate very little, like a bird's stomach. Guze didn't force her. He didn't have an appetite himself. Later, he took her to the People's Square. Cece asked him for money to buy several portions of food to feed the pigeons. She fed them quietly, but there was a hint of mist in her eyes. Guze squatted beside her and looked at her delicate face. He reached out to touch her hair, but Cece avoided him. She didn't let him touch her after signing the contract, as if he was a stranger next to her. Guzé's palm fell in the air, and that feeling of emptiness came again. He didn't say anything and put down his palm. The fool continued to feed the pigeons. Her movements were very gentle and slow, as if she was afraid of scaring the white pigeons. When her hand was empty, she looked up and smiled at him. "Okay, I'm leaving." Guzé immediately grabbed her arm. "Where are you going?" "Back to Lanyu's place," Lin Cece said softly and smiled at him. That smile was very strong, but it hid the little fool's wounds. Although she was silly, she knew that her blessing was fake. How could someone who liked someone be willing to like someone else? She looked down. "I'm going to take a taxi. I'll go back to Lanyu's place." She got up, but Guzé didn't let go of her. He felt that it was difficult for him to let go. "I'll take you." He frowned and tightened his grip. His little fool gently shook off his hand and said, "No need. I know the way." She said the route softly and accurately, so that Guzé couldn't refute her. In the end, he let her leave and let her take a taxi. He was going to follow behind the car until she reached Lanyu's place. But Guzé didn't expect that this choice would cause him to lose the little fool forever. It made her become another person forever. She did not forget this memory, but she chose to be indifferent. She had changed from a little fool to a very clever person, and she no longer looked at him with eyes full of passion and love. In her eyes, there was only mockery, not even hatred. Many times when he was drunk, many times when he had nightmares, he would always miss that little fool. He missed the feeling of holding her in his arms. However, there was no more. There was only Lin Cece, no more little fool. She did not hate him. She did not know if it was true or not, but he did hate her. At this moment, Guzé stood there, watching her cross the road and walk towards the bus station on the other side. Suddenly, his eyes narrowed and he shouted, "Cece, get out of the way." This little fool, it was clearly a red light, and she clearly knew how to cross the road, but she still walked forward and walked very fast. A white BMW rushed towards her, but she didn't stop and continued walking straight ahead. In Guzé's vision, her small body was knocked into the air with a bang. She took off, landed heavily on the ground. Guzé almost rushed over, picked her up, and checked her body. Strangely, she wasn't injured. She had just fainted. The driver came down immediately, and when he saw Guzé, he asked, "Do you want to send her to the hospital immediately?" Guzé carried Cece, and the driver was a good person, so he didn't push the blame and directly sent her to the hospital. Chapter 3100. The little fool was lying on the white hospital bed and hadn't woken up yet. Guzé sat by the bed and kept watch. His secretary had just come and told him that Miss Wenwan was waiting for him to try on a dress with her, because their engagement day was in 3 days. Guzé only said softly, "Let her do as she sees fit." The secretary wanted to say something, but when she looked at the girl lying on the hospital bed, she couldn't bear to do it. She left. The attending doctor came over and Guzé asked softly, "When will she wake up?" "After 12 hours, it should be at night." The attending doctor said gently, "There will be no problem, Mr. Gu. All of Mrs. Gu's physiological signs are fine." Guzé suddenly said, "We just signed the divorce papers." The doctor was stunned for a moment and then whispered, "I'm sorry, but she will still be Mrs. Gu in the future," Guzé said softly again. The doctor hesitated. In fact, he wanted to suggest that Mr. Gu also have his brain examined. Night fell, and Cece still hadn't woken up. However, Lanyu received the news and rushed over. Lanyu looked very tired, and Qinshun was beside him. Without saying a word, Lanyu grabbed Guzé's collar and dragged him out. Qinshun followed him slowly. "You take care of Cece. I can deal with this scumbag." Lanyu gritted his teeth. Qinshun leaned against the door and sighed. "I'm really afraid that you are no match for him. You have been a vegetable before, haven't you?" Lanyu glared at her fiercely. At this time, what was the point of talking about being a vegetable? He wanted to beat Guzé into a vegetable now. What kind of person was he? Did he think that marrying Cece was like raising a little pet? If he liked her, he could keep her. If he didn't like her, he could just throw her in Sea City. He directly abandoned her, when it was disadvantageous to the company. Why did he want to marry Wan? In Lan Yu's mind, marriage was a lifetime, not to mention a broken company. Even if the woman he liked wanted his life, it didn't matter. The woman was his, and he had to protect her. Lan Yu punched down, and Gu Zei's body slammed into the wall with a bang. Blood came out of his mouth and nose. Qin Shin was stunned for a moment. Sigh, too violent. Only now did she realize that Lan Yu had been merciful to her in the past. Seeing that Gu Zei did not intend to fight back, she thought that he still had some conscience, so she walked back to the ward. It was said that Cece had fainted and no one knew when she would wake up. However, when Qin Shin walked in, Cece's eyes were open. She lay there quietly, tears falling from the corners of her eyes. Those tears made Qin Shin's heart ache. She walked over to sit by the bed and carefully wiped away Cece's tears. You still have us. Lan Yu and I will be with you. Lin Cece's gaze gently fell on Qin Shin's face. She looked at him quietly. Then she propped herself up and slowly hugged Qin Shin. Sister Qin Shin, I remember. She buried her face in Qin Shin's chest. Our shared memories, our days in New York, I remember everything. Qin Shin's body was a little tense. Lin Cece continued to speak softly. Sister Qin Shin, it's all in the past, isn't it? It's all in the past. She closed her eyes in pain. The past was like a deep wound that had been engraved in her bones. She had never dared to forget it. She didn't tell Qin Shin about the past because she was the only one who needed to remember the darkness. Of course, she didn't forget about the part with Gu Zei. But when she remembered everything, it was already over between her and Gu Zei. Even if her heart hurt, it was still over. There was nothing to be nostalgic about when it was over. The only thing she was sure of was she hated him. Chapter 3101. Qin Shin was slightly stunned and then looked at Cece. Lin Cece smiled weakly and then closed her eyes in discomfort. At that moment, her mind was in a mess. Those things that she remembered one by one spun chaotically in her mind. What she thought about the most was still Gu Zei. With her eyes closed, she could hear the sound outside. It was Lan Yu and Gu Zei fighting. She knew. When she opened her eyes again, Qin Shin's hand grabbed her. Qin Shin's heart ached a little, and then she panicked because Cece's gaze was very different from before. The innocence and timidity were gone, and there was a look that had seen through the world. Qin Shin hoped that Cece would always be innocent, but she also felt that it was a good thing that she remembered everything now. At least she wouldn't be so stupid as to keep waiting for Gu Zei. She held Cece's hand and said very softly, "Do you want to tell him? Tell him that you remember everything and tell him that he is nothing in your life. Cece, Lan Yu told me that you liked me before, so continue to like me." Whatever she could give, she would give. She would never abandon Cece. Although she remembered everything, although she was no longer stupid, Qin Shin felt that she had a responsibility towards Cece. Lin Cece shook her head and smiled lightly. No need. Let him treat me as a little fool forever. Anyway, we have nothing to do with each other anymore. She said it indifferently, but tears still flowed down her cheeks one by one. Qin Shin hugged her. Lin Cece's body fell in her arms, and she said very softly, Sister Qin Shin, I feel like I had a very, very long dream. I'm awake, but you're still in the dream. It doesn't matter where I am. I'll be with you. Qin Shin lowered her head. Cece, forget him and start again. Lin Cece leaned on her shoulder, tears streaming down her face. She said one word, okay. Qin Shin wiped away her tears and laid her down. Have a good rest. At that moment, the door of the ward was pushed open. The person standing at the door was not Lan Yu, but Gu Zei. Gu Zei didn't look too good. The corner of his mouth was broken, and one side of his face was bruised. It was obvious that he had been beaten badly by Lan Yu. He rushed in because he heard the movement in the ward. Cece had woken up. Their eyes met. Her eyes were stained with a layer of deep sorrow. She looked at him like a wounded animal. Also fear. She's afraid of him. It wasn't the cautiousness of the past, but the fear of not wanting to be involved again. She wanted to retreat to a safe place, a place where she could not be hurt. Gu Zei's heart trembled, and he closed his eyes slightly. He wanted to go forward and touch her, But Cece hugged Chin Chun tightly, still looking at him cautiously, her posture guarded. What else could Lan Yu say? He knew clearly that he had lost his little fool, but he asked for it. He was the one who gave up on her. Many years ago, he had given up on Gu Mei. Until today, he didn't regret it. But he really didn't know if he would regret it one day when he gave up on Cece. Her eyes were still clear, but they weren't bright anymore. Gu Zei's heart was filled with indescribable pain. It was easy to obtain, and he didn't hesitate too much when he gave up. But after giving up, he couldn't let go. It's hard to completely let go. Chapter 3102. She doesn't need you. Lan Yu stood at the door and said quietly. Gu Zei clenched his fingers. I'll take care of her until she gets out of the hospital. As he spoke, he lowered his gaze and gently looked at Cece's face. Cece's little face was a little confused. She looked up at Gu Zei and said word by word, I don't want you to take care of me. Gu Zei's heart was bleeding. He just looked at her deeply. His little fool looked at him with a guarded gaze and shrank into Chin Chen's arms. She pursed her lips and was unwilling to say a word to him. Gu Zei thought that she hated him to the core. She also understood hate. He smiled dejectedly and took a step back. His little fool's eyes dimmed. She lowered her eyes and said softly, I'll live with Lan Yu in the future. Gu Zei's throat seemed to be blocked. She said it very casually. Without him, Gu Zei, she still had Lan Yu. Did she really love him? Or did she just treat him as one of the people who took care of her? His eyes also dimmed, and he was even a little hurt. He was the one who didn't want her. He was the one who abandoned her. But now he felt that he had been abandoned by her. Gu Zei smiled faintly. That's pretty good too. I'm very relieved to have Lan Yu take care of you. At this moment, Lan Yu said coldly, stop pretending to be kind. If you cared about her, you wouldn't have abandoned her. After he said that, Lin Cece's little face turned pale. Her lips trembled as she looked at Gu Zei. Gu Zei's heart ached. He almost wanted to say to her, let's not divorce. Can Cece come home with me? But this wasn't his character. Since he had given up on her, he wouldn't change his mind. However, he felt that he had calculated wrongly. He had thought that giving up would be temporary, and that as long as she endured for 2 years, he would be able to bring her back. However, he had miscalculated the weight of him in her heart and miscalculated the fate between them. One wrong step led to many wrong steps, pushing his little fool further and further away. At this moment, his little fool's lips trembled as he said softly, go. These 2 words pierced his heart. Gu Zei closed his eyes and stared at her. She did not avoid his eyes and looked at her as if she was a bad person. Chin Chun said, Gu Zei, are you getting engaged to Wenwan? If that's the case, don't bother Cece anymore. She's not your wife. Not your wife? Gu Zei's heart tightened, his gaze fixed on Cece's face. They had only been husband and wife for a few months, but it seemed that the fact that she was his wife had been deeply ingrained in his mind. He had never thought of marrying Wenwan. Perhaps he would want an heir, but he would not give her the title of Mrs. Gu. The engagement was just a temporary measure. He said softly, Cece, do you think so too? His little fool hugged Chin Chun and pursed her lips. After a long while, she said yes. Gu Zei's face was ashen. He stood dejected and stared fixedly at his little fool. His ex-wife. Cece kept staring at him. There were too many things hidden in her eyes, and he couldn't see them clearly for a moment. Finally, he took a step back. Take good care of her. Finally, he gave up and turned to walk towards the door. When he placed his finger on the doorknob, the little person on the bed quickly ran over and hugged his body from behind. She hugged him tightly and forcefully. Chapter 3103. Her little face was buried behind his back, her eyes filled with tears. Gu Zei looked down at her fingers, his throat tight. You have to be obedient in the future, okay? The silly girl behind him kept crying. She asked as she cried, You said that you would be with me forever. Why don't you want me anymore? To Gu Zei, it was like a blow to his heart. He stood there without moving, letting her cry behind him. He told himself not to be soft-hearted. Once he was soft-hearted, he wouldn't be able to leave. The silly girl cried for a long time before she finally let go of him. She remembered everything. She still hated him. She couldn't tell if she was acting or if she really couldn't bear to part with him. She slowly let go of him and said in a low voice, "Go. Don't worry, I won't disturb you anymore." Overnight, his silly girl seemed to have grown up. No, she was no longer his silly girl. She was ex-wife. Guze turned back, but Lanyu had already entered. Cece was in his arms, in another man's arms, and he had no right to snatch it back. He couldn't blame her. He was the one who didn't want her. For the sake of profits, for the stock price. Finally, he left. The door closed, separating him and the silly girl into two different worlds. Guze didn't leave the hospital immediately. Instead, he walked to the end of the corridor and opened the window to look at the dark night outside. The neon lights on the street lit up the entire night sky. But his world was a gloomy gray. He used to be high-spirited. He used to think that he could keep Cece safe and let her be his woman. But in the end, he still abandoned her. He didn't know how long she would cry, how long she would be sad, or whether she would forget him soon. Guze smoked slowly for a long time. He only snapped back to his senses when the cigarette box was empty. His eyes were a little moist. He blinked and felt extremely bitter. He emptied the cigarette box and threw it into the trash before walking back to the ward. He placed his palm on the door. After hesitating, he still wanted to see her again. At least he wanted to see her sleep and not cry. However, when Guze opened the door, there was no one in the ward, and the bed was neatly folded. Guze's heart felt as if it had fallen. He immediately ran to the nurse's duty room. "Where are the patients in the VIP ward?" The nurse looked at Guze's miserable face and whispered. Mr. Lon took him away. "Discharged," Guze murmured and took a step back. He laughed, and it was a somewhat desolate laugh. The nurse was shocked. She wanted to say something, but Guze had already left. Another nurse whispered, "Lin Cece is this man's wife. Didn't you see it in the newspaper a while ago? It seems like a scumbag abandoned his wife, and he still pretended to be so affectionate. Who would believe that?" The nurse from before bit her lip. It really doesn't look like she's faking it. She's showing her true feelings. Even if there is a bit of affection, it is insignificant compared to his wealth of tens of billions. Save it. This man is going to get engaged in a few days with the daughter of a major shareholder. The news that my father is a reporter is definitely true. Guze left the hospital, not knowing where to go. He had more than one villa in B City, but he didn't want to go back. He had injuries on his body and his face, but he didn't want to treat them. Chapter 31:04. Why? He didn't know why he was so heartless. He just said that he didn't want her anymore. He had said that he would take care of her for the rest of her life. Walking under the neon lights, Guze's smile was uglier than crying. He didn't want to go to so many places. He just wanted to go to that small apartment. Guze drove over, opened the door, and watched quietly, smelling the thin scent that belonged to her. He suddenly slammed the door and ran downstairs. He got back in the car and made a decision. To see City. Back to their home. His and the little fool's home. It took Guze 2 hours to drive to Sea City. It was almost 2 o'clock in the morning when he arrived. The Annie was not asleep. She had been sitting on the sofa. When she heard the sound of the car, she immediately got up and looked at him expectantly. When she saw Guze, she asked happily, "Sir, where's Mrs.?" "See?" Guze wiped his face and said calmly, "She won't come back." The auntie was stunned. After a long time, she murmured, "I thought the news in the newspaper wasn't true. Sir didn't want Mrs. just like that?" Although Mrs. was naive, she was really cute. Every time Sir came over, she was very happy. The auntie really thought that Sir liked Mrs. very much, which was why he married her. How could he just leave her like that? Of course, Guze wouldn't explain to the auntie. He just slowly took off his coat and said calmly, "I'm going upstairs to rest. Don't let anyone disturb me." The auntie wanted to say something, but didn't say anything in the end. When Guze went upstairs, the auntie suddenly stopped him. "Sir, is Mrs. not coming back?" Guze's body paused at the stairs before he slowly turned back to look at the auntie. After a long time, he nodded and said in a hoarse voice, "Yes, she won't come back. Someone will take care of her." The auntie's face was stiff. "Then I won't do it, either." The salary here was extremely high, But the auntie was happy because Cece was cute. She was really a lovely little girl. The auntie's daughter had settled abroad, so the auntie doted on Cece like a little daughter. Gouze frowned. Cece isn't here, but you can still stay here. The salary remains the same. However, this did not attract the auntie. The auntie was quite determined. I think I won't do it. As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and picked up a gray woolen vest from the sofa. This was knitted by Madame for Sir. It took her 2 months to knit it. She wouldn't let me help with the finishing touches, so she only finished it today. Gouze stood there, frozen, his body unable to move. The auntie went over and put it in his hand. I'll pack up and leave tomorrow morning. She said it without a trace of reluctance. Gouze's voice was slightly hoarse. Do you also blame me for being too cruel to Cece? The auntie said lightly. It's not my place to comment on Sir's family matters, but I love Madame dearly. No, Cece isn't Madame anymore. She didn't want to say more, so she stopped talking and slowly walked into her room. Meanwhile, Gouze lowered his head to look at the vest in his hand. The material was good, but the weave was not very smooth. There was also a particularly childish red heart embroidered on the heart. No matter how he looked at it, it didn't seem like Gouze's style at all. But at this moment, holding it in his hand, it was like holding the little fool's heart. He had once suspected that she didn't love him, but now it was completely gone. She loved to play, but she spent so much time just to knit a sweater for him. Chapter 31:05. Gouze clenched his fists, closing his eyes as he slowly walked up the stairs. Cece had lived in this house for a few months, but he rarely came here. The whole place was filled with her scent. He knew that after she left this time, she wouldn't come back. She wouldn't want the things that she placed here, the things that he bought for her. Gouze pushed open the door to the master bedroom. There was a light purple light inside because the silly girl said that it looked nice. He felt that it was like the side of the road, the kind of indecent place. But Cece liked to lie under this kind of light and look at the stars. She said that the stars could talk. But Gouze had looked at the place where she usually lay, but he didn't see the stars that could talk, only the sky full of stars. Her world was different from his, but he still captured her into his world, allowing her to enrich his world. But in the end, he still chased her out. Gouze walked slowly to the balcony, pulled open the floor-to-ceiling window, and sat where she usually sat. Within reach was a little fluffy bunny. She loved these children's toys, but he was unhappy. Sometimes when he did what she did, his legs would touch something fluffy, and when he pulled it out, it would be a bear or a rabbit. When he glared at her, the little fool would hug that damn thing tightly with an innocent expression on her face. That made him even angrier. But in the future, it wouldn't happen again. She wouldn't surprise him with these things on the bed. She wouldn't lie here and say to him with sparkling eyes, "Look, Gouze, the stars in the sky can talk." It wouldn't happen again. Never again. When he made the decision to abandon her, he thought that it would happen again. But when she lay on the hospital bed in a daze, he knew that it wouldn't happen again. Gouze let go of the rabbit and looked at the vest for a long time. He looked at it for a long time before he slowly put it on. He looked at himself in the floor-to-ceiling window and smiled faintly. It was a very ugly smile. Later, the sweater was kept by Gouze, and he would wear it for one day every year on his birthday. Many people didn't understand why a person like President Gou would wear such an ugly sweater, but Gouze knew that it was atonement. Perhaps it was nostalgia, but who knew? Gouze went to take a shower, took the first aid kit, and treated his wound. Then, he put on some clothes and went downstairs. He walked to his aunt's bedroom and knocked on the door. The auntie came to open the door. When the door opened, Gouze saw that the auntie had already packed her luggage. His throat seemed to be blocked, as if he saw Cece leaving. He said in a hoarse voice, "Can I not leave if I can state my conditions?" The auntie stared at him and suddenly asked, "Sir, do you love Madame?" "I don't know, but I like her. I hope she can come back one day," Gouze said and lowered his eyes. "Can you stay here until she comes back?" Before the auntie could reject him, Gouze pleaded in a low voice, "Nothing will change here, and no one will come here. I will only stay here for 2 days a month." After digesting what he said, The auntie hesitated for a moment and finally said, "Let me think about it." Guzé smiled. "Thank you." With that, he left and walked slowly down the corridor. The auntie didn't close the door immediately, but looked at his back. Chapter 3106. Guzé returned to the master bedroom and quietly spent the whole night alone. In the past, when he came here, the villa was always particularly lively because his Cece loved to play. When he came back, she would pester him and have endless things to say. Sometimes, she would take him to the backyard to look at the newly discovered bugs in the soil. Sometimes, she would take him to look at the moon tonight and tell him as if she had discovered a new continent. "Guzé, tonight's moon is rounder than usual." This little fool. He always thought of this. But he knew that he spoke more in one night here than in a week in H City. She was obviously very stupid and said childish things, but he always smiled at her stupidity, at her foolishness, at her naivety. Guzé smiled slightly. Even he didn't know why he smiled. It was probably because he was thinking of her. But after a while, he closed his eyes slightly. His little fool was no longer here. He couldn't find her to talk to even if he wanted to. Guzé sat in the master bedroom and smoked for the whole night. When the sky was slightly bright, there was a knock on the door. His heart skipped a beat, and he looked up. "Cece." His voice was indescribably hoarse. He quickly walked to the door and opened it. It wasn't the person he wanted to see at the door, but the auntie. As soon as the door opened, the auntie choked. The thick smell of smoke in the master bedroom seemed to be burning the whole room. She frowned and couldn't help but say why. Guzé's heart was sour and bitter, but he didn't say anything. The auntie sighed again. "How about this? I'll only do it for 3 years. If Madame doesn't come back in 3 years, I'll go back to my hometown." This was enough for Guzé. After the auntie finished speaking, she went in to tidy up Guzé and open the window. But she considerately didn't touch the decorations in the bedroom. Everything was as it was when Madame left. Sir must have kept her for this purpose, pretending that Madame was still here. It was really sour thinking about it. She clearly liked her, but why did she push her away? The auntie thought about Cece's naivety again. What would she do if she went out to live? She couldn't help but ask. Guzé looked down. She will be well taken care of. He raised his eyes and looked at the white sky outside, muttering, "If I knew this day would come, I shouldn't have married her. She would have always been happy. I like to see her like that." If he didn't marry her, he might be able to look at her like that for the rest of his life. As long as he wanted to talk to her, he could pick her up and grill her. He could take her to his apartment and pretend that he was poor. However, he had married her and abandoned her. There was no medicine for regret, so Guzé could only move forward. He stayed in C City for a day before returning to H City. He called Lanyu to ask him about Cece. After a few seconds of silence, Lanyu said to him, "From now on, Cece has nothing to do with you." "Guzé, have you forgotten that you're about to get engaged?" Guzé was speechless. Lanyu quickly hung up. That day, after work, Guzé drove to Lanyu's villa. He wanted to see Cece from afar. His car was parked outside the villa. He leaned against the car and smoked for 2 hours, but he didn't see Cece. At 8 in the evening, the door to the villa opened. It wasn't Lanyu who walked out, but Qin-shun. Qin-shun walked out slowly. At that moment, Guzé seemed to see Qin-mu. He had liked Qin-mu for so many years, but at this moment, facing a face that looked almost the same, he was no longer moved. Chapter 3107. Qin-shun walked out and looked at Guzé quietly. Guzé did the same. After a long while, he said with difficulty, "Qin-shun, where's Cece?" Qin-shun leaned against the black carved door and looked at him calmly. "Guzé, tell me, why are you here? If you're just here to see her, then there's no need. If you're destined to abandon her, then stay away from her. Otherwise, not to mention Lanyu, even I want to punch you." Qin-shun still didn't tell him that Cece had regained her memory, because there was really no need. Guzé had made up his mind. Whether Cece was well or not had nothing to do with him anymore. When he signed the divorce certificate and asked Cece to sign it, they would be strangers. Qin-shun then took a step back. "You can leave. If Cece doesn't want to see you, we won't let you see her either." The black carved door slowly closed in front of Guzé. Gu Zhe's gaze was slightly tense, and his Adam's apple couldn't help moving. He wanted to ask Qin Shan to open the door and tell her to give him time, but his pride made him unable to say it. He could only watch the door close, as if he and the fool were in two completely different worlds. The phone in his pocket kept ringing. He knew that it was his secretary calling to confirm the engagement party tomorrow. Finally, he picked up and said calmly, "Tell Miss Wen that I'll be there on time tomorrow." With that, he hung up. The secretary looked at the phone, wanted to say something, but hesitating. She just wanted to tell her boss that the former Mrs. Gu had returned all the divorce compensation that President Gu had given her, without keeping a single cent. But President Gu wasn't in a good mood right now, so she'd better wait for a chance. However, the secretary's wait made Gu Zhe miss the key information. The fool had remembered that she had the ability to deal with things. Otherwise, Lan Yu wouldn't have helped her. After all, he was the one who had abandoned her. In the eyes of a businessman like Lan Yu, it was normal for him to take compensation. Gu Zhe waited outside for a long time. He smoked about half a pack of cigarettes before leaving. After he left, he didn't know where he went. In the end, he went to that apartment and cooked for himself. However, he filled 2 rice bowls. He looked at her quietly, then suddenly got up and walked to the French window to dial her cell phone number. A few seconds after the call, the phone rang with a cold voice. "Sorry, the number you dialed is power off." He hit her again, and it was the same for a long time. He thought that it wasn't that the phone was turned off, but that the number wasn't going to be used. If he wanted to investigate, he could. But what was the use of that? What was the point? Gu Zhe chuckled, laughing at himself for being too ridiculous. He clearly didn't want her, so why did he pretend to be so affectionate? However, what did the phone drop? Definitely not his tears. Why was he crying? Absolutely not. Gu Zhe closed his eyes slightly, but a drop of hot liquid dripped down his face. Gu Zhe, and when Xian's engagement ceremony was very warm, and when Xian was in charge of it. She was a very talented woman, and she took care of every aspect of the engagement ceremony. Of course, when Xian herself was also very glamorous. However, Gu Zhe was a little absent-minded. He looked up at the pigeons flying in the sky and said softly, "Where did all these pigeons come from?" When Xian didn't know either, so she asked the secretary. The secretary hesitated for a moment before saying, "It's probably from the wedding company. It looks festive." Chapter 3108. Gu Zhe looked up again and followed the pigeons. Although it wasn't the right time, the secretary still whispered, "President Gu, there's something I want to tell you." Gu Zhe looked at her. The secretary's voice became even softer. "Miss Lin went to Lawyer Su yesterday and returned all the movable and immovable property that President Gu gave her, including the cash. Oh yes, and the wedding ring." When Xian, who was listening at the side, consciously retreated to the side. He was now her fiancé, and she had to behave decently and gracefully. Gu Zhe narrowed his eyes and stared at his secretary. "What did you say? She went by herself? Where did she go?" The secretary took a step back. "She came after a while, President Gu." The secretary wanted to say that Miss Lin looked very different from before, but she didn't dare to say anything when she saw President Gu's expression. Because President Gu looked like he was about to kill someone. A flock of pigeons flew over, flapping their wings. Gu Zhe blinked and suddenly walked out of the hotel. When Xian couldn't calm down and called out anxiously, "Gu Zhe." Gu Zhe paused and turned back to look at her. "I remembered that I have something important to do. I'll be back before 5 in the afternoon." There was a dinner party starting at 6, and he had to attend. Although when Xian was unwilling and she told herself that he would come back, she was a woman and she knew where he went. He went to find that little fool. She didn't understand why an outstanding man like him would marry a little fool and why he couldn't forget her after the divorce. When Xian tried her best to suppress her dissatisfaction and said softly, "Gu Zhe, today is our engagement day." Gu Zhe looked at her and comforted her with a faint smile. "I won't forget." After saying that, he left without looking back. When Xian raised her head slightly and looked at Gu Zhe's secretary with a smile. "He loves his ex-wife, right?" Secretary Li didn't dare to say anything. In fact, she didn't know either because Lin Cece rarely came to the company. After all, It was a secret marriage. However, from President Gu's unusual attitude these few days, she could tell that President Gu liked his ex-wife, and it was highly possible that President Gu was regretting it now. However, the marriage was already set. If he went back on his word now, it would have a greater negative impact on Hung Tong. Secretary Li knew that President Gu could not turn back no matter what, so she smiled at Wenwan and said, "Don't worry. President Gu is just lost for a while. He will soon find that Miss Wen is the most suitable person for him." Wenwan lowered her eyes and smiled. It's just suitable, right? Secretary Li could only do this. How could she force Mr. Gu to love Miss Wen? This was too much to ask of him. Guze drove to the People's Square. There were even more pigeons there. In the midst of all the whiteness, his little fool was sitting on a chair, wearing a light yellow dress. She was feeding the pigeons with a bag of food in her hand. Her little face was written with innocence and a trace of confusion and sadness. He was the one who brought all of this to her. Guze's footsteps became slower and lighter. He slowly walked over and squatted in front of her. His voice was also very soft. Cece. Her hands and her body froze. Only her fingertips moved slightly. Then, she gently turned her head to look at him. There was shock on her little face. Then, her long eyelashes blinked and 2 drops of tears fell. Guze, she said softly and slowly stood up. Chapter 3109. Guze walked over step by step. In the end, he couldn't help but hold her in his arms. He pressed his face against hers and called her name, Cece. His little fool was softly held in his arms. She was so obedient in his arms, just like when they were still husband and wife. Guze rarely had emotional moments in his life. Even when he liked Shinmu for 10 years, he had never been so emotional. He hugged her, and his hot lips moved from the side of her face to her lips. He kissed her in the crowded square. It was a very intense kiss. On one hand, it was because he hadn't touched her for a long time, so the kiss was very intense. Amidst the intensity, there was a hint of sadness. When his rationality came back to him, he brought her back to the villa where he usually lived. Cece had never been here even once. On his luxurious gray bed, he did it again and again. It was as if it was the last time, and they were entangled. Cece had been very obedient. Her little hands held onto the gray bed sheets, and her face was buried in the white pillow as she cried softly. "Why are you crying?" He kissed her, kissing her carefully again and again. At this moment, he even thought despicably that maybe he could have the best of both worlds. He could raise Cece and raise her and be city. It was nothing for a man like him to raise a woman, and what Wenwan wanted was just a superficial relationship. He would give it to her, and Cece was still what he wanted. After a few intense rounds, Guze was a little exhausted. He leaned against the bed and smoked quietly, while Cece fell asleep. The watch beside him was already pointing to 5 o'clock, but Guze didn't want to get up at all. He was addicted to this feeling, to being one with her. In fact, they had done it many times, but Cece today was different. In the past, when he wanted her, she would be very passive. She would always blush, bite her lips, and turn her face to the side. She rarely responded to him and didn't know much about love. He was often satisfied physically, but not mentally, so he had always treated her like a child. But this time was different. Cece responded to him. Guze's heart was indescribably satisfied as he looked down at the little thing in his arms. Cece slowly woke up and opened her eyes to look at Guze. "Why aren't you sleeping?" Guze's voice was low and husky as he reached out to put out the cigarette. Lin Cece got up slightly and leaned her head on his shoulder. She pursed her lips and said, "Guze, I had a dream." He stared at her. "I dreamed that you didn't want me. You married someone else," she said in a small voice. Guze smiled faintly. "How could that be? How could I not want you?" His gaze was a little distant as he put his arm around her small shoulders. "We'll stay here from now on, okay?" His little fool looked at him and asked softly, "Aren't we divorced?" Guze thought for a while and said softly, "We will get married again in the future." "We'll get married again, but not now," she murmured, sounding disappointed. "People who aren't married shouldn't live together." She wanted to get up, but Guzé stopped her. He frowned and said, "Cece, be good and stay here. I'll get Annie to accompany you, okay?" Cece's eyes widened, and she blinked at him. Guzé continued, "I can also bring your parents over and buy a villa next door for them to live with you." Chapter 31:10. Cece had returned all the assets he had given her. If he had thought about it carefully, he wouldn't have made such a mistake, and he wouldn't have let Cece slip through his fingers. Cece looked at him and blinked again. There were 2 drops of tears on her eyelashes. Guzé smiled. "What's wrong?" His little fool smiled at him happily. "I'm very happy, little fool." He ruffled her hair, feeling guilty. His arrangement satisfied himself, but it was extremely unfair and cruel to her. Guzé still had this bit of self-awareness. Cece smiled at him with tears in her eyes. Her smile was very serious. Guzé held her in his arms and kissed her seriously. He hugged her very tightly, as if he wanted to melt her into his bones and blood. Cece cried out in pain, then raised her face and bit his neck. Guzé's body trembled, and then he felt his little thing biting and gnawing. His neck hurt. It wasn't that he didn't know what the consequences would be, but he couldn't bear to stop her now. After Cece finished biting, she looked at him with watery eyes. Once again, Guzé pressed her under his body and took her again. It was already 5:30 when it ended. He had to go back to the hotel to finish the engagement party. Cece was asleep, so he took a quick shower and put on his clothes. Looking in the mirror, he saw the kiss mark on his neck. It was so bright that he couldn't hide it. Guzé frowned and felt that he was a little crazy. When he walked out, Cece was still curled up on the luxurious bed like a pitiful kitten. He couldn't help bending over and kissing her face. A pair of delicate hands wrapped around his neck and took the initiative to kiss him. Her initiative almost made Guzé want to abandon everything and have sex with her on this bed. But he was Guzé. He was in his 30s, and he wasn't an impulsive teenager. He kissed her soothingly for a while and then patted her. "I'm going out for a while. I'll be back tonight, okay?" Cece didn't let go of his neck and quietly said, "Guzé, I'm hungry." After saying that, she looked at him eagerly. Guzé closed his eyes and let out a long breath. After a long time, he said in a low and hoarse voice, "I'll ask my secretary to come over and accompany you. She cooks very well, okay? And you?" Cece looked at him eagerly. Guzé forced a smile. "I have some business to deal with." In the end, he still couldn't let go of her. However, after the marriage was dissolved, he realized that as long as she looked at him like a stray animal, he couldn't help but soften his heart. Cece let go of him and whispered, "Then come back soon. I'll miss you." The last 4 words seemed to have a magical effect on him. Guzé reached out and pinched her little face. He smiled and said, "Okay, I know." In the end, he still left. When he got into the car, he reached out to touch the kiss mark on his neck and looked at it in the rearview mirror. He knew that the kiss mark would be dissatisfied with Wen, but he felt that it wasn't difficult to deal with a woman. He decided to have a showdown with Wen. He wanted to raise Cece, and he wanted to raise her openly. He felt that it was a little ironic. When she was his wife, she wasn't so open and above board. On the contrary, when she was Ching, she could put on the table. Chapter 31:11. Guzé had a complete plan in mind. He had originally wanted an heir, but he didn't want one anymore. After sleeping with Cece again, he seemed to hate sleeping with someone else, especially when Xian. Guzé's eyes darkened. He called his secretary, started the car, and drove towards the hotel. The secretary held her phone in shock. What did her boss say? He asked her to go to his villa to take care of Cece. Cece was the boss's ex-wife. She had just met her yesterday. She was very smart and didn't want to be trifled with. She needed to be taken care of. However, no matter what, the secretary still went. She had to expose this fake white rabbit's true colors. In the secretary's heart, only a lady like Wen was worthy of her boss. Before 6 o'clock, Guzé arrived on time. Everyone was waiting for him. The atmosphere was a little strange. Everyone was looking at him, including Wen. Because of the hickey on his neck, it was clear and eye-catching. Guzé smiled faintly. He walked over and put his arm around Wen Xian's shoulder, smiling. He didn't explain, but everyone would think that the hickey was left by Wen Xian. However, Wen Xian didn't lose her memory. Of course, she knew that it was left by another woman. She smiled and cooperated, but the corner of her mouth twitched. She asked in a stiff voice, "By sex? Is it your mistress, or is it left behind by that little fool?" "I don't think it's that little fool. She's not that scheming. Guze, I couldn't tell that you were such a man. Now that we're engaged, you have to continue acting even if you think you're blind. Okay?" Guze hugged her shoulder and said calmly, "If you want to break off the engagement, you have to get your father's approval. Otherwise, we'll both be finished and penniless, understand?" When Xian's eyes flashed with anger, but she held it in and asked calmly, "It's Lin Cece, isn't it?" She had never thought that that little fool would be so broad-minded. Guze's eyes flashed with displeasure. When Xian, this isn't something you can interfere with. When Xian looked down, ex-wives are the most difficult creatures to deal with in this world. I've learned today, even if she's a little fool. Don't talk about her like that. Guze's voice became even more displeased. Just then, the music started. It was time for them to enter. At this moment, Guze's phone rang. He glanced at Wenwan. She smiled warmly. "Take it." In her heart, she was still somewhat disappointed. She had liked Guze for a long time. She had used dishonorable methods to become his fiancée. In the future, she would be his wife, but he would rather like a little fool than her. His body was here, but his heart was not. But she would rather endure the fact that he had someone else in his heart and become his wife. Perhaps after a long time, he would feel that she was very good, 100 times more suitable to be his wife than Lin Cece. Guze picked up the phone, but it wasn't Cece on the other end, but his secretary, Su Qiaonan. Su Qiaonan sounded a little anxious. "President Gu, something has happened." Guze's voice was tense. "What happened to Cece?" Su Qiaonan choked and said anxiously, "Immediately terminate the wedding." I'm afraid that Lin Cece, before he could finish, the sound of a man and a woman panting could be heard from the other end of Guze's phone. She was especially familiar with the man's voice. It was her wise and powerful President Gu. Chapter 31:12. At one end of the red carpet, Guze held his phone and looked at the big screen in the banquet hall. It was the scene of him and Cece making love that day. Cece's face could not be seen, but his back could be seen. His side profile and the extremely twisted expression on his face showed that he was in great joy. The 360-degree sound system resounded in every corner of the room. It was his loud gasps, and he called out Cece's name. Guze stood there and watched the scene. He watched him pressing his little fool down. He was surprised to see how intense he was. It was as if he was going to kill the person in his arms. The scene was chaotic. Although the hotel security was good and no reporters had sneaked in, some of the guests had secretly taken a video. This was truly explosive and exciting. President Gu had cheated on the day of his engagement. It was suspected that his ex-wife was a little fool. In just a minute, the video quickly spread. The next day, Hung Tong's stock price would definitely fall. As for how much it would fall, Guze didn't know. At this moment, he only knew that the person who had created this surprise was none other than his little fool. There was a smear of red in front of him. He saw his little fool appear on the stage in the banquet hall. She was wearing a little black Chanel dress, the legendary little black dress of revenge. Her long black hair was loose and draped over her shoulders, making her features look even more pure. She was like an angel, but she was an angel of revenge. There was no longer that ignorant look in her eyes. She looked at Guze with a hint of mockery and playfulness. She walked to the front of the stage, and Guze stared at her. Lin Cece held the microphone and smiled. "Guze, this is my engagement present for you. Do you like it?" Guze walked towards her. When Xian suddenly reached out to grab him, but he pushed her away. "Guze, you'll be falling in her trap if you go over." When Xian's voice was a little hoarse. It was a trap set by her from the beginning to the end. She lied to you, and she's taking revenge. However, Guze still walked towards the stage. As he walked, he said, "If it's revenge, how can she get revenge if I don't go?" His eyes were dyed red, and his face was stiff and trembling slightly. The people around him automatically made way for him. This was the best show of the year, much more thrilling than any engagement drama. Guze walked up to her. Lin Cece didn't avoid him. She looked at him with a smile. "President Gu, what can I do for you?" "When?" he asked softly. Lin Cece smiled. "When will you remember everything?" Probably when he had a concussion. His eyes deepened as he reached out and pressed her shoulder. He smiled faintly. "Happy now?" "I'm very happy." Lin Cece smiled. "I'm very happy to see you in such a sorry state. In order to get back at me, you don't feel disgusted sleeping with me. You hate me, don't you?" Guze asked coldly. Lin Cece smiled. "Just think of it as being bitten by a dog." Her hand was suddenly caught, and she caressed his neck where there was a kiss mark. He stared at her. "What about this place? Was it also bitten by a dog?" Chapter 31:13. Guze grabbed her arm. Lin Cece looked at him. He looked back in her eyes and asked softly, "Do you remember everything? Do you still remember the days when we were together? Do you still remember Sea City?" Lin Cece's face trembled slightly. Guze said softly, "I went to Sea City. I asked Annie to stay. Nothing has changed there." Lin Cece closed her eyes and said, "Why are you saying all this?" "Cece, go back to Sea City. We can be like before. I'll marry you in 2 years." He said softly, "But I have to finish the engagement party now." Lin Cece smiled and tears rolled down her cheeks. "Guze, you don't blame me. Shouldn't you point at my nose and tell me to get lost? You seem to love me very much, but you love me so much that you can't bear to abandon me. You love me so much that you can't bear to let me cry and be sad. You can't bear to let me get engaged to another woman." She sobbed. "Even if you have nothing, I'm willing to follow you. I have money. I have a lot of money. I can support you." She took a step back and her face was full of tears. "But you don't want all this." "Guze, it's me who doesn't want you now. Do you hear me? It's me who doesn't want you. All of this was carefully planned by me. I wanted you to be finished and never be able to make a comeback. Look, I'm not your little white rabbit. I'm very bad, so you don't have to miss me. That little fool is just your illusion. The me standing in front of you is the real me. A broken me is indeed not good enough for President Gu, but I'm not so cheap that I want to be a rich man's mistress." Lin Cece took off the ring on her finger. It was Guze who had put it on her today. She threw it at him. The ring hit his face and left a red mark, but Guze didn't move. He still looked at her quietly. Lin Cece raised her head and said, "My surname is Lin. Although my father has passed away, I'm still called Lin Cece. I can't let my father be gossiped about, saying that his daughter became someone else's mistress." She looked at Guze with a resolute expression, but there was a hint of stubbornness in her eyes. Guze looked at her. The scenes of him meeting her flashed past his mind. The way she looked at him while lying on her stomach, the way she fed the pigeons, the way she tilted her head and said, "Guze, you're so good-looking." These were all in the past. The current Cece was no longer that little fool. Guze's eyes reddened as he took a step forward. He knew what he was going to do next would be on the social news, financial news, entertainment news, and Weibo headlines. He would be in the headlines of everything tomorrow. But at this moment, he didn't care. He just wanted to do what he wanted. Lin Cece was forcefully pulled into his arms, so tightly that she seemed to melt into his bones and blood, just like how they had made love before. His thin lips were on her carotid artery, and his voice was low. "Have you really decided? You chose your family over me, didn't you?" "Yes. Those who have been abandoned will never hope for happiness again." Lin Cece reached out to push him, but she couldn't push him away. Guze hugged her tightly. Then he kissed her. It was a very heavy kiss, the kind that went deep into his soul. He felt a sense of betrayal, not towards his career, but towards his entire being. At this moment, he even thought about how it felt to be abandoned. It turned out that his heart would hurt. Chapter 31:14. After saying that, he stared at her eyes for a few seconds. He suddenly pushed her away. Lin Cece took a few steps back and steadied herself. Guze didn't walk towards when Xin. Instead, he left. He gave up on the engagement party. He gave up on the best chance to make a comeback. He gave up on working with one Xin. Guze didn't know what was wrong with him. Suddenly, he was being willful. He almost didn't recognize himself. He should have gotten engaged to an Xin or even gotten married to calm the shareholders down. But he didn't want to. He would rather go bankrupt. He would rather lose everything. Because everything couldn't compare to her words. I am Lin Cece. I won't be someone else's mistress. She was fine. She remembered everything. So he was the one who was abandoned. Guze's departure made many people panic. The shareholders present were the most against it, because it was very likely that the shares in their hands would become a piece of waste paper. Everyone was trying to stop him, but Guze still walked toward the exit of the hotel. At this moment, Hung Tong's life was uncertain, but his relationship with his little fool was dead. Suddenly he paused. Amidst the noise in the room, he quietly looked at Lin Cece. They were more than 10 meters apart. He said softly, "You're not her," although it was very far away, and although his voice was very soft, she still heard it. His little fool smiled and said, "Yes, she's dead. Guze, you killed her with your own hands." Guze's eyes were filled with self-mockery. He took a step back and said, "Yes, I killed her. I lost her." The person in front of him wasn't his little fool. She wasn't him anymore. Guze turned around and left without looking back. The next day, because of the engagement party that night, Hung Tong's stock price fell rapidly. It fell for 3 consecutive days. Guze spent 3 nights in the company. On the 4th day, he got off work and was about to return to the villa. Secretary Su sighed and said, "President Gu, Miss Lin's masterpiece is still in the villa. We also found a camera head. Do you want me to get someone to clean it up?" Guze gently raised his hand. "No need." As he walked out, Secretary Su couldn't help but say, "President Gu, why don't you get engaged to Miss Wen? You know that she is willing to cooperate. As long as Miss Wen says that she forgives you, it will not be a big deal." Guze stopped in his tracks again. He held his jacket and smiled lightly. "If that's the case, I'll look down on myself, let alone her. This she wasn't Wen Wan." As for who she was, Su Qiaonan knew very well. She hesitated for a moment and said, "President Gu, you are too worried about her." "That's why." Guze interrupted her. "She's not someone you can talk about." Secretary Su fell silent, but he still felt it was a pity. Hung Tong was built by President Gu with years of hard work. Originally, Vice President Wen and the others would be retired by President Gu in 2 years, but this happened at this critical juncture. In Secretary Su's heart, Lin Cece was a femme fatale. But until now, President Gu still hasn't let it go. Under Secretary Su's gaze, Guze left. He returned to the villa, back to the place where Cece had only stayed for a few hours. That little fool had come here to scheme against him. Great. She had schemed against him until he almost lost everything. Actually, it was quite fair. He had given up on her for the sake of benefits, and she had schemed against him until he went bankrupt. Chapter 31:15. Guze threw his jacket on the bed and looked at the pajamas that he had personally put on Cece. He picked it up and smelled it. There was a faint scent from her body, the milk scent that belonged to a child. She liked fresh milk, so she always had that scent on her body. Smelling it made him very impulsive, like an aphrodisiac. But it was all over. He had abandoned her, and she didn't want him anymore. They were like 2 beasts that hurt each other. Guze smiled softly and lay on the bed. Her scent was also on the pillow. It drilled into his nose, reminding him of the craziness they had a few days ago. He clenched his teeth and sneered. No wonder she was different that day. No wonder she was so gentle that day. She was taking revenge on him. She used her body to take revenge. She didn't care about the humiliation of her body. Although she wasn't Cece anymore, the angrier his little fool was, the more she was abandoned, the more she wouldn't let him touch her. She couldn't even take a touch or a kiss. How could she have done it so vividly like that? He was the one who was lustful and neglected it. Guze couldn't stand lying on the bed. Just smelling her scent and lying like that made him excited again. He wanted it again. He felt a little ashamed and went to the bathroom to take a cold shower. But there were a few words written in lipstick on the bathroom mirror. "I hate you." The bright red lipstick was like fresh blood, opening its bloody mouth at you in the mirror. Guzé stared at it in a daze. It was as if he could see Cece standing on the stage and sneering at him again. He suddenly turned on the tap and flushed his face from head to toe. He must have gone crazy. He actually wanted to capture her and tie her up in the room and never let her leave. But his soul told him that, so what if he captured her? She wasn't a little fool anymore. There was a living soul in her body. That body didn't belong to the little fool anymore. In other words, in this world, the little fool was actually dead. His little fool no longer existed. Guzé let out a long breath and looked up at himself in the mirror. His face was covered in water vapor, and his eyes looked terrifying scarlet red, and his eyeballs were slightly protruding. He had never been like this before. This was the first time he had suffered a setback since he had established Hungto. He couldn't fall now. If he fell, a large number of people would rush over and trample on him. Guzé chuckled and murmured, "There's nowhere to retreat." He closed his eyes. Life and death are boundless. He only gave himself one night off. He drove back to Sea City and appeared at the villa in a daze. The Annie was shocked. She had received news that she was going to City B to take care of Cece, but Su Qiaonan's secretary had called and told her that there was no need. The Annie didn't understand, but she didn't dare to ask Mr. Gu. Now that Mr. Gu had returned dejectedly, the Annie had a bad feeling about this. Sure enough, Guzé sat on the sofa for a long time. He wiped his face and said, "I'll give you a check for 1 million. You can go back to your hometown. We don't need anyone here anymore." Chapter 31:16. The auntie looked frightened, but there were some things she had to ask in person. She was afraid that once she left, she wouldn't have another chance. She wasn't doing it for herself, but for Cece. When she asked about Cece, Guzé smiled strangely. The auntie's heart sank. "She's dead." Guzé's expression was solemn. "I killed her. I killed my innocent little wife." The auntie was even more worried. Cece wasn't dead, but Mr. Gu had gone crazy. The auntie's voice had a hint of sobbing. "Mr. Gu, if that's the case, don't go and disturb Cece anymore. She's really pitiful." Guzé was stunned for a long time and suddenly smiled. "Yes, she's pitiful, but I'm hateful." He closed his eyes, and a sense of sadness welled up in his heart. He had liked Cece, and he had abandoned Cece, but when he wanted to apologize and make up for it, that person was gone. The person who appeared in his life again wasn't a little fool, but a woman named Lin Cece. Her heart was very cruel, and it was comparable to his. Guzé smiled, got up, and walked upstairs. As he walked, he said in a low voice, "After all, I'm the one who let her down." The Annie was still frightened, and she didn't dare to sleep. In the middle of the night, she heard movement in the backyard and got up to take a look. Under the moonlight, Mr. Gu was digging a hole to bury something, and the thing in his hand was very familiar. When the Annie recognized it, she was shocked. God, that was the sweater that Cece knitted for Mr. Gu, and Mr. Gu actually buried it. The auntie stumbled to the backyard, and Guzé stopped her indifferently. "Don't come over. I want to spend one last time with her." The auntie gasped, and her eyes were wide open as she looked at Guzé under the moonlight. Guzé held the sweater, and in the end, he still put it into the wet hole. He looked down for a long time, and then dug the soil with his bare hands and buried the sweater bit by bit. The Annie's eyes were especially scary under the moonlight. She murmured, "Mr. Gu has gone crazy." Guzé didn't seem to hear or care. He buried himself in the ground and waited for the soil to be flat before taking a wooden board over. He then took a knife and casually cut a cut on his finger. Then he wrote a few words on the wooden board with his blood. Then he embedded the wooden board deeply into the soil. After doing all this, Guzé sat to the side and didn't do anything. He just sat there silently. The auntie gathered her courage and walked over. She also saw the words written on the sign. "My wife is a fool." "Guzé." The auntie's voice trembled. "Cece didn't die." "Mr. Gu, aren't you cursing her with this?" Guzé didn't pay attention to her. After a long time, he said indifferently, "But the little fool is dead. No one will return her to me." After that, he was silent for a long time before he said softly, "Auntie, go back to your room. I want to be alone for a while. This was the last night he and the little fool would spend together. Tomorrow, he would lock up this place. In the future, he would never come in again. In the future, he would be heartless, and he would never fall in love with any woman again. Once was enough. He sat from night until dawn. When a ray of morning light shone on his handsome face, he actually felt like a lifetime had passed. His and the little fool's life had passed so quickly. His gaze landed on the board, and his fingers stroked it. I'm leaving. Wait here for me to come back. I'll be back in a few days, and then I'll accompany you for a few more days. Okay? Chapter 31:17. On Guzé's 35th birthday, he was drunk. 2 years had passed. It had been a long 2 years. Everything remained the same, but the people had changed. 2 years ago, Hung Tong was almost finished. It took him 2 years to catch his breath. Until today, when he, Guzé, was once again standing in the circle of the rich and powerful in B City, his state of mind was already different. On his birthday this year, he was a little indulgent. He let his family organize an extremely luxurious dinner for him and also received his birthday present, a pure and innocent 20-year-old girl. In the hotel suite, Guzé looked at the girl with a slightly shocked expression. It was not because of the arrangement of his subordinates, but because this girl looked a lot like that person, a dead person. Guzé's eyes narrowed slightly and kept staring at her. The girl was a little reserved. After all, she had never served a man before. Her black hair was let loose, and her small face was beautiful. Her cheeks were slightly red, and she knelt on the bed, biting her lips and gently taking off the dress on her body. Maybe he had drunk a little bit of wine, and in his tipsy state, he mistook her for someone else. He didn't even know if he called someone's name in a daze. He only knew that the young girl was pressed under his body, and he kissed her, calling the name of the dead person vaguely. Little fool. The girl under him opened her misty eyes and didn't dare to say anything. She just opened her lips slightly, silently inviting him. She could only get the money if Guzé wanted her. She needed the money. Guzé was really a little confused. He was drunk, and it was a little similar. He almost wanted her. Almost all of his clothes fell off. He was good-looking and not as vulgar as middle-aged rich men. In the eyes of a 20-year-old girl, he was the most attractive. The girl couldn't help but be moved. She called out with tears in her eyes, "Mr. Gu." Guzé's eyes were filled with sorrow. Mr. Gu. That person never called him that. She used a timid voice to call him Guzé. Even after she hated him to the core, she still called him Guzé. It was just that the meaning was different. He paused. In the end, he still didn't take the girl, because he was clear-headed and realized that the person in his arms wasn't that person. He was just one step away from asking for a virgin that no one had ever touched before, and there would definitely be some entanglements. Everything stopped. Guzé propped himself up with one hand. His black eyes stared at the girl below him as if they were dyed with ink. Then he moved his body bit by bit and rolled to the side. If it wasn't her, she wouldn't want it. He lay flat on his back and recalled the events of the past 2 years, his fiancée, when Xian was still his fiancée. There was no engagement banquet, but in the end, they were still engaged in name. It was just that after using the father and daughter of the one family, when Xian's father was sent to prison by him, he deliberately kept Xian's name until now, which was also an irony to her. This kind of fiancé would only see each other once or twice a year, and no one would believe it. In order to protect the one family's shares in Hungtong, when Xian actually gritted her teeth and endured this humiliation. She was willing to endure it, and Guzé didn't force her to break off the engagement. He was not living well, so someone had to accompany him. Guzé looked up at the ceiling and closed his eyes slightly. There was a quiet pain in his heart. There was a wound that had never healed, but as time passed, the wound became bigger and bigger. It expanded to a place that he and others couldn't see. Chapter 31:18. Guzé stopped everything, rolled to the side, and closed his eyes. The girl beside him was a little embarrassed, but she still turned sideways and asked boldly, "Mr. Gu, are you not satisfied with me?" Guzé let out a long sigh. No, the girl still had hope in her heart, so she continued to walk over and kissed Guzé's face. She kissed him carefully and shyly. Usually, a man who is used to seeing love affairs will be tempted by such a lovely girl. But Guzé didn't. He opened his eyes slowly and calmed down. Don't touch me. The girl was stunned and she was about to cry. Mr. Gu, don't you like me? They say I look like... Shut up. Guzé's voice suddenly became stern. Don't mention her. He rarely acted like this, and the girl had never experienced it before. She was scared and didn't dare to say a word. Seeing that she was about to cry, Guzé wasn't in the mood to comfort her. He just took the checkbook and wrote a check for 1,000,000 yuan and placed it on the bedside table. He said calmly, You can leave later, or you can leave tomorrow. You're leaving? Although the girl knew that there was no hope, she still mustered up her courage. She was a new star in the entertainment industry and needed someone to support her. She would rather it be Guzé than be tainted by someone else. But he didn't want her. He gave her 1,000,000 yuan, but he didn't want her. Sensing that he was about to leave, her tender little hands tugged at his sleeves. Her eyes filled with a pleading look. Guzé didn't want to look at that face. His eyes fell on the door. Didn't they tell you that I have a bad temper? The girl was stunned and then let go of her fingers. She understood what he meant. If he detained her, he wouldn't be polite to her. She wouldn't even have a chance to beg a man in the future. The girl was stunned and watched Guzé leave. But she was unwilling to give up, so she put on a bathrobe and followed him out. As soon as she opened the door, she saw Guzé and a beautiful girl looking at each other. His gaze was as deep as the night. She knew the girl in front of her. Her name was Lin Cece, and she was extremely beautiful and popular. For the past 2 years, King Entertainment had praised her to the skies. She was said to be used by Qin Mo, Qin Shun, and Lan Yu. As for Lin Cece, Xiao Xiao was envious and jealous. At the same time, she looked down on her. Her heart was pounding as she looked at Lin Cece, who was dressed in a fiery red dress and had a clean little face. Her lips were so beautiful that it made one want to kiss them, but there was a faint smile on her face that made one want to strangle her. Xiao Xiao had heard rumors that Lin Cece was Guzé's ex-wife, but no one had confirmed it. Moreover, Guzé now had a fiancé, so no one mentioned the past. She also knew that the person who sent her to Guzé's bed said that she looked like Lin Cece. But this resemblance didn't make Mr. Gu want her. At the critical moment, he let go of her. His face was as indifferent as a monk without any desires. After Xiao Xiao came out, there were red marks on her body. Guzé didn't do it to the end, but he still left a few kiss marks on Xiao Xiao's neck. They were clear and striking. Looking at Lin Cece's faint smile, Xiao Xiao felt that she had found some confidence. Chapter 31:19. So when she looked at Lin Cece, there was a hint of provocation in her eyes. But Lin Cece didn't care about this provocation, because she didn't even care about Guzé. The past was the past. The little fool who had temporarily lived in her body was dead, and she had nothing to do with Guzé. In other words, the one who married Guzé and liked Guzé was the little fool, not Lin Cece. So she couldn't care less about how he was now. It didn't matter. They were two people who had nothing to do with each other. Lin Cece only looked at it for a few seconds before looking away and walking towards the elevator. Guzé did the same. He didn't chase after her. He was going to the elevator too. Just then, Xiao Xiao said, Guzé. This time, she didn't call him Mr. Gu, but Guzé. Guzé paused. Xiao Xiao said softly, Can I look for you next time? Guzé's eyes fell on her, and then looked away. Lin Cece had walked far away. His face was indifferent. No. With that, he walked straight to the elevator, ignoring Xiao Xiao's pale face. Lin Cece had already left in the elevator. Guzé looked at the red numbers, his face gloomy. But what made him even more gloomy was that a man had walked out of the suite Lin Cece had come out from. It was none other than Qin Mo, and there was a hickey on Qin Mo's neck. It was a very distinct hickey, so glaring that it made one's imagination go wild. One could imagine how that little mouth had been so close to his skin and sucked out such a thing. And that little mouth belonged to Lin Cece. Guze had heard of Lin Cc scandal with Lan Yu, and Qin Mo forget about Lan Yu and Qin Shun. They didn't have such a heavy taste, and it was impossible for them to have sex together. But Qin Mo, he believed it. He was young and promising, and he had single-handedly made her famous. What kind of bed couldn't he climb? In the past 2 years, Lin Cc had become extremely popular. She was no longer like she was in the past. There was nothing wrong with sacrificing a little. Guze didn't pay any attention to what was happening, nor did he do anything about it. He thought it was because his wife had passed away. He refused to accept the fact that Lin Cc was a little fool. In his heart, Lin Cc was not his wife, but a person who hated him. It was good to hate him. The only connection he had with her was that she hated him and he hated her. However, his hatred was unreasonable. He hated her for taking away the body that belonged to the little fool. He hated that she was not that person. While Guze was thinking about all this, Qin Mo had already walked over. When he saw Guze, he was obviously startled. Then, he smiled faintly and said, "Why are you here too?" Guze watched him caress the mark without a trace. His heart was unperturbed. He said calmly, "You've given me a big gift." They were both men, so it was easy to understand. Qin Mo was also very familiar with him, so he smiled. "You accepted it." Guze smiled faintly and didn't say anything. But with him here, saying that he didn't accept it would be pretentious. Qin Mo was done asking. He didn't take it to heart and didn't press further. The elevator came up again. Guze entered with him. Both of them had a tacit understanding not to mention Lin Cc. Instead, they chatted casually. Hungtong had invested a lot in the past few years, and it wasn't like they didn't have any business dealings with King Entertainment. Chapter 31:20. At that moment, Guze's thoughts were very deep and heavy. It was as if he had been slapped in the face. His eyes were fixed on Lin Cc, who was in the car. She turned her face sideways and took a tissue from the cabinet in front. When she turned her head, her face collided with Guze's. Then, she turned back to her side expressionlessly and sat upright. Guze was still staring at her. He didn't know why he minded so much. Qin Mo, who was beside him, had no intention of explaining at all. He said goodbye to Guze in a graceful manner. He really didn't need to explain to him. He and that person were divorced. She was free to be with whoever she wanted. Guze felt that he shouldn't care, but his legs didn't move at all. He was still standing there. Qin Mo had already gotten in the car. He didn't start the car immediately. Instead, he said a few words to Lin Cc. Then, Guze watched as Lin Cc leaned her head on Qin Mo's shoulder. The car started slowly. He couldn't see anything else, but that scene deeply hurt Guze's heart. He stood in the parking lot with a cold and elegant smile on his face. He took out a cigarette from his pocket and lit it faintly. It was bitter. After smoking about one cigarette, he walked to his car and opened the door to get in. The moment he started the car, his face was as dark as water. As the car drove out, the tall buildings by the roadside put up huge advertisements, and Video One were playing the advertisement for Lin Cc. The spokesperson for Dio's advertisement used to be Mo Nansheng, but in the past year, it had been changed to Lin Cc. Guze happened to see it while driving. His face was still as calm as water. She was obviously a mature, 25-year-old woman, but she could still act like a young girl and accurately control her cuteness. However, only Guze understood how cold and heartless her heart was. The advertisement slid past one by one. Guze's face looked even worse for the past 2 years. He had tried to avoid getting news about her, but he had been in H City all the time. How could he not know anything about her? His heart was extremely depressed, so he drove faster and faster. Therefore, on Guze's 35th birthday, he got into a car accident, and the car crashed straight into the separation belt. With a bang, the safety gas popped out. Fortunately, it didn't injure any vital parts. It was just a slight fracture of the bones in his hand. Guze's secretary, Su Qiaonan, came over in the middle of the night. He helped his boss get admitted to the hospital and took care of the car. By the time he finished, it was already 2 o'clock in the morning. She pursed her lips and asked softly, "Mr. Gu, are you hungry? Do you need me to buy you supper?" Guze looked down and did not answer her question directly. Instead, he said softly, "Today is my birthday." Su Qiaonan froze for a moment. They had just prepared a birthday party for Guze last night, and they had even specially arranged for an innocent little celebrity to present to President Gu. That beauty, President Gu would probably like it. But now, President Gu looked very disappointed. Was it because Xiao didn't satisfy him? Su Qiaonan hesitated for a moment and said, "President Gu, do you need any other arrangements?" Guze looked up. His face looked slightly pale under the dim yellow light, but he still looked handsome. She heard him say, "Help me buy a roasted pigeon." Secretary Su was stunned by Guze's order. He actually forgot to reply for a long time. "Why? You can't buy it?" Guze asked her softly. Su Qiaonan forced a smile. "I'll try my best." You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.